Okay, I guess this works. All right, well, so when I was asked to speak, I felt I had to take the task that, as far as I know, nobody ever did, which was actually to read our book. It's the Captain Henry of Geauga book, written by his son, Frederick Henry, and it's like 700 some pages long. And I'm glad you asked me like 3 months ahead of time. And so as I read it, I made some notes, like summary notes, and that came down to about 38 pages. But anyway, it really helped me by writing the stuff down. So the story really is kind of about Captain Henry, Charles Eugene Henry. He's really the story, kind of. And fortunately, he had his son Frederick was so good about recording everything and saving the letters, and so we're really lucky for that. But also, and I'll be talking more about it, but when Simon and Rhoda came across from Connecticut, Massachusetts, they brought 10 kids, and all those 10 kids, they were here and they assimilated in. So there's a lot of relatives, a lot of descendants around. And one of them spoke out, when I was teaching up in Alaska, one of them spoke out to Grace, Larry Henry. And he's a relative of William Henry, which was the second child of Simon and Rhoda. And he's, I think, in Chicago, right, Grace? And he wrote us and wanted some information. This is way before I knew, what I know now. But he then gave us I think he emailed it or something, a document, and a lot of the information that came from where we actually came in Ireland came from him, and a lot of the, some of those descendants, he did some research, went into the New England area and took pictures, and we've got photographs that he had. So it's, it's like now, it was like, oh, we got to get a hold of this guy and get him back around this area. So anyway, Charles Henry was born November 29th, 1835, and he died November 3rd, 1906. And I gotta also stop it. Don, you're here. When I say things that aren't right, or you remember, or if like me, maybe you won't remember, but say, speak up. Anybody, speak up, please. So, let's see. How do I work this here? Okay, so we came, let's see, from Scotch Presbyterian colonists came over from Scotland to Ireland. In Ireland, there's 4 provinces in Ireland. The northernmost province is Ulster, and the Henrys really originated from Ulster. And in Ulster, here's Ulster, the county of Antrim is right here, and I just kind of Googled what it might look like on the coast of Antrim, and this is kind of a picture of that. So it kind of, there's so many times as I was doing this, getting ready for this, that I had to go in and research more about things, and it was like a real history lesson for me to do all this. So anyway, Larry Henry, who I mentioned before, it's not mentioned in the Captain Henry book, but the very first descendant that didn't end up coming over to America was our first one that we know of anyway, was Hugh Henry. And he was 8 grandfather, 8 great-great-grandfathers, and he was born in 1665. So what made them leave, Ulster and come to the United States? And there's a bunch of reasons. I couldn't remember it all, so I had to write it down. A century later, they came because of prolonged drought, a series of epidemics, a depressed state of linen exports, an increasing oppression of extortionate rents, compulsory religious conformity, and it forced this whole-scale migration to America in 1718 through 1720. So that's kind of where we originally came from. Whoops, let's see, wrong direction. All right. So this is as I was writing this, I was reminded of the Bible. You know, Hugh's son begot William, and William begot Robert. Anyway, William and Mary, they moved to Massachusetts, and they had 4 children. His oldest son was Robert. Robert had John. John would eventually move to Connecticut from Massachusetts. And John and his wife, Mary, they had their very firstborn son, Simon, in 1766. And this is, like I said, this thing's where things start to really get interesting now. Isn't he a character, huh? So, let's see. So Simon and Rhoda, they have 10 kids. And Simon wasn't actually, Rhoda was from a family that was, well thought of in the area, and they didn't think too highly of Simon. In fact, Simon had to put a ladder up against the window, and they had to come down that way to get married. So, let's see, they had their 10 kids. Names were Orrin, William, John, Rhoda, Ann Osborne, Mary, Simon Nelson, Calvin Parsons, Milo, and Newton. And their 3 oldest kids, Orrin, William, and John, they served in the War of 1812, although I don't think they really got into a lot of skirmishes and stuff. So our descendant that we came from was John, and that's the 3rd oldest. And John, he was the 3rd one to volunteer to go into the War of 1812, and his mom, Rhoda, was not real happy about that. He was in the light artillery, and he had a LA on his shirt, on his jacket. And at this point, Simon was thinking that he wanted to move, west to Ohio and have more land for his boys. And so he decided he probably ought to have John go with his oldest, Orrin, to Bainbridge, and plus his wife Rhoda was really pushing him to get him out of the service. And so when his friends found out that his dad got him out of the service, that LA, they started calling him lazy ass. And so anyway, he let's see, they so this was the land that they had in Washington, Massachusetts. And it was about 200 acres. And he was very respected at the time. He was one of the selectmen many times, kind of in the legislature of Massachusetts. And he just decided that they wanted to trade these 200 acres for a tract of 548 in, let's see, I don't know, for this 548 out west in Bainbridge. So they sent sons Orrin and John a year earlier to clear land and build a cabin. They basically said, we'll see you in a year. Let us know when you're ready. And then they traveled 600 miles for 45 days, 15 miles a day. And they ended up stopping at, maybe I'm going to need to use that microphone. They didn't charge us or something. I don't know. Well, maybe I just got to be loud. Okay, so they went a year earlier, traveling for 45 days, and they stopped at Hudson Corners in Chester, which is now Chesterland. And when I looked up Hudson Corners, that's what's now is the common area in Chesterland. Maybe you're familiar with it. It's like a little park there, and that used to be what was called Hudson's Corners. And these Henrys that came, when they said goodbye to the people in Washington, Massachusetts, it was like, this is it. We'll probably never see you again. And so when they got to Chesterland, then Orrin knew he brought 2 teams of horses to finish the last leg, into Bainbridge. But in the order of getting to Bainbridge, the first one that came from Massachusetts was David McConaughey, Jasper Lacey, and Gamaliel Kent, Alexander Osborne, George and Robert Smith, Enos Kingsley, Joseph Eli, John Fowler, and then Simon Henry, Jonas Childs, Justice Bissell, Daniel McFarland, and Philip Haskins. So that's what was listed in the book, that as far as the order of them arriving into Bainbridge. Let's see if I forgot anything. Oh, and when Orrin came back with the 2 teams of horses, he brought with him 2 of the guys, Robert Smith and John Fowler. They accompanied him, and I guess it was a real tearful reunion when they got back together, because they never thought they were going to see him again. Okay.
What year was that?
What year was that? Let's see if I can figure that out. Does it say in here at all? That's a good question. I'm sure it's in here.
1817.
Is that right? Okay.
1817?
I need somebody to look up a little bit. Yeah, I should have that on here, but I don't know. Okay. Let's see. So when they get to Bainbridge, and this you can't, it's kind of fuzzy, you can't really tell. But really the reason I had this on here is when they got here, they, so Simon, he gave the tracts of land. This is a Simon Henry of like 100 acres. And then he gave his son Orrin 100 acres. And then right along the east side of the Chagrin River, William Henry had that. And then my descendant, John Henry, had the next 100 acres over there. And then there was another Simon Henry over here. So this probably would have been about Pettibone Road right here. And there's the river crossing there. I guess the river was kind of like a border to the two families. And I guess the brothers, they kind of squabbled a lot. William was the older brother to John, and William kept complaining about John's cows coming over there and eating from his area, and then the river would change with erosion, and then that messed up the property lines, and for some reason John got blamed for that. Then let's see, so there were a couple cousins that Charles really enjoyed, and one of them was William's son Harrison. His nickname was Soup, and Orrin's son Marvin, and his name was Hack. And they played mostly together, although he really was good friends with all of his cousins. It's just that some of them just lived too far away to really be able to get together with him. But they had a lot of fun just running through the valleys and the hills of the Chagrin River area. And it's interesting, where Simon and Orrin lived up here, the cemetery that's the Fowler Cemetery, the Southeast Cemetery off of Haskins Road. Yeah.
In the order of all the families coming to Bainbridge, that was 1811.
1811. Thank you. 1811. So they, Grace and I looked at the cemetery there in that Fowler Cemetery off of Haskins, and we were able to find Simon's grave and Orrin's, I believe, and there's probably some other ones there too. And then as you move over, William, he's the next cemetery is the one by Joan's house, behind her house. Let's see, what do we call that? The old Southwest burial ground?
Southwest burial.
Okay. And some of those the Henrys that lived around that area, they were buried in that area. And then then over here, we don't have a cemetery over there. I guess they went to Chagrin, because that's in I know Frederick and Charles, yeah, thank you. They're in the Evergreen Hill Cemetery in Chagrin. So that's okay. So now I'm going to kind of focus more in on John now. He when they got there, they actually had a cabin, and actually I read that there was actually 2 cabins. So they had a cabin there, and it wasn't in real in real great shape, And John, he was a teacher. He would actually go to Pennsylvania and teach. And there, when Charles was born, he was like only 5 pounds. And they were really worried that they were going to lose him because he was, you know, he was born in November, so right at the winter. So he's really young. Yeah, Rhoda. So here's, or no, excuse me, Polly. John and Polly, and these are their kids. So here's Charles, and let's see, go through it real quick. Maria and, let's see, Maria Goodsell and Newton are here. Maria and Newton. Newton was older then, and he is kind of credited as saving Charles's life because he would go out when it was real cold and warm up the milk that he could then eat during the middle of the night when he needed it. Then we also have Eliza and Edward right here. Edward was the younger brother, and he comes into the story quite a bit later. And then we got Ann Brewster and Simon. This was the oldest one. When John divvied up his 100 acres, for some reason he owed 15 acres to his brother Calvin, so he was left with 85, and he split that between Simon and Charles. So yeah, they're. Okay, let's see. And there's a quote from Charles when he was trying to tell his story to Fred. Charles was the 7th of 9 kids. He said, "Your grandma and grandpa had, I think, 9 children who lived to preach and do other things. 2 or 3 died young. They were probably the best ones." And Simon, he built a house for his first wife, Prudence Southworth. And he actually built the house that is the present day big house. I mean, it's on that land, that footprint. But after 6 months, Prudence said, you know, she said that Simon had said he owned the whole farm. And she found out that he didn't, and so she left him. And so when she left him, the rest of the family then moved into that house. And that was when Charles was 10 years old. Okay, let's see. Okay, so now we've got, okay, so Charles, he quit school at 16 to work. He doesn't go to the regular school anymore. He makes hoops, laboring on farms, teaching school for his older brother Simon. And then he announced at age 18 that he was going to go to Michigan and work in a wood mill. And so when that happened, he actually went then. And he made sure to write letters to his youngest brother, Edward, because he knew Edward would read the letters to all the girls that he really cared about. And so let's see. But while he was gone, William, his brother that lived right across the river, and he had a bunch of kids, and he really enjoyed playing with those kids growing up. 3 of those kids died of smallpox. So that really, really bothered him. When he came back from Michigan, this is his sister, I think it's Mary, and Mary married Henry Brewster. So now you got, you know, another Henry into this who's not even related, and it gets real confusing. But anyway, so we got Henry Brewster, and Charles goes into business with him, and they make like cheese boxes, and that's out of their place out in Auburn. In fact, let's see, they talk about well, that's okay. So he goes into this business with Henry Brewster making these things, and but they're starting to hear the name of James Garfield a lot. He's doing a lot of speaking around there. You know, we're having a lot more talk now about succession and that kind of stuff. And anyway, I think it's because they mentioned in the book because he's so influential and he's so charismatic that's probably why Charles ends up going to Hiram, because James happens to be the principal teacher at the Eclectic Institute. It wasn't called Hiram College then. So he was there, and he would, and he was, so he went there, but he started going there when he was 22, so he was a little older. And but he would go off and on for like 5 years. But the real key thing there was that he happened to be there at the exact same time that Garfield was there the whole time. And they became, maybe it's because he was a little older or something, but they became very good friends. And so, yeah, Garfield was teaching there, and eventually he actually became a state senator while he was there. And they refer to this time when Garfield was there as the golden days of the Eclectic Institute. So every once in a while, Charles would leave school and go teach or work at the cheese box factory to make some money. He would also work. He actually paid for his younger brother Edward's tuition, and the deal was that he would cook and he would pay for his tuition, and they lived off campus. And he taught at the Auburn Bridge Creek School, and when you go in Auburn, there's like a development with a street named Auburn. Let's see, Bridge Creek Development, I think. So there's a lot of neat history around there. This, by the way, I really wanted the pictures of Henry and Mary Brewster, but this is his wife down the road, which I'll talk more about. What happened? Okay, here we are. It's coming. So, yeah, so this is Sophie Williams at the time. So, okay, I think, let's see, we're good. Okay, so now this is, okay, towards the end of his college career, he wanted to go, he and Edward, his younger brother, they decided to travel to Burton, which was a big deal back then, to go from Hiram to Burton, and take the exam to become a teacher. So they did that one day, and then they had to come back, and it was a real long day, and he was ready to go back to their house, but somebody convinced him to go to this social, and at that social, that's when he met Sophie. And this is the Williams family, the Frederick and Marcia Williams. And it's kind of significant because her brother is Frederick Augustus Williams. And that name ended up, so the author of the book, Frederick Henry, it's Frederick A. Henry, it's Frederick Augustus Henry. These two were his kind of like namesakes, and they were kind of important to him. Of course, for Charles, he ended up becoming his brother-in-law. But let's see. So, hang on a second. And she's from Shalersville. So he ends up graduating. He decided, his younger brother Edward decided that he was going to enlist early. And he went into Cleveland and enlisted. And Charles decided he wanted to finish school first. So he did that. And then when he got done, since Edward wasn't around the household to help with chores and everything, Charles ended up going back home, but getting a teaching job in Solon. So he was going to teach in Solon. And he also, his neighbor across, which would be across Pettibone, is a guy named Dr. Shippard. And they had kind of a deal that Charles was actually going to become a doctor. And he was going to sort of end up giving over his practice to him. But all of a sudden one day, James Garfield and Frederick, they showed up at his house and basically said, we got to go back to Hiram and put together a regiment for the war. And so, but Garfield had heard that Charles was interested maybe in pursuing medical, and he offered him that he could go to the, to be some sort of a medical position in the war. But Charles said no, he wanted to carry a musket, so he didn't want to do that. So anyway, he returns with them to Hiram. They end up going to Hiram as well as Manaway, and after listening to Garfield talk about everything, then Charles ended up becoming the first person to enlist in the regiment. And then when they had their regiment and they took a vote to see who would be like the main leader in it, Charles missed becoming that by one vote. And if he would have been voted for himself, he would have been the person, but he didn't. These were kind of the main people. Make sure I'm including everything here. Yeah, these were kind of the main people to Charles. In some ways, in the rest of his life. Of course, this is, okay, it's coming. So James Garfield, of course, he ends up becoming our 20th president of the United States. This is Burke Hinsdale. He, for people who know Hiram, Hinsdale is one of the big buildings there. Hinsdale also ends up becoming president of Hiram. He also becomes superintendent of Cleveland schools, and then he also becomes a professor up in Michigan. And then we also, let's see, we have J.H. Rhodes, who I think is a cousin of Joseph Rudolph, and he's a teacher and a real good friend of Charles's. Joseph Rudolph, his sister, Lucretia, ends up marrying Garfield. And because they're just such good friends, he always stays a real good friend of him. And then this is one of his best friends of all, Don Pardee. And he ends up naming his, Charles names 3 of his boys. The first one is Frederick Augustus Henry, named after these 2 gentlemen. And then he has a James, or actually I think it was, no, James Garfield Henry was another one. And then there was a Don Pardee Henry. And both of the James Garfield Henry and the Don Pardee Henry, both those kids end up dying. Don ends up dying real early, almost right after he learns how to walk. And James, I'll talk about later, but he dies when he's in law school. So anyway, these guys are really influential in Charles's life. Now let's see if I made sure I said everything. Yeah, okay. So now we've got the 42nd Regiment. Charles is a sergeant in there. He was later commissioned as a second lieutenant, second lieutenant. And let's see, what did I want to say about this?
Jim, this is in the Union Army of the Civil War.
Right, yeah, thank you, yeah. Union Army, their first involvement is, in eastern Kentucky, in Pound Gap and Cumberland Gap. They're in actually the very first battle at Middle Creek, Kentucky. That was the first battle that the Union wins. It wasn't a real big battle, but it was the first one. And Garfield was leading at that time. I think he got a commission based on that. It was the first Union victory, and it was led by Colonel Garfield. They would also spend time in skirmishes in Tennessee. During that time, Frederick Augustus, who I pointed out earlier, Frederick got sick, pretty sick. They ended up having him go back to Bainbridge, and he dies in Bainbridge. And Fred says in the book that he always regrets that he never got a chance to meet his namesake. Garfield, at this point, Garfield moves on. He ends up kind of a bigger job. He ends up going to battle with Grant, and so the main person that Charles is now with is Don Pardee, and Don Pardee is kind of famous because when they were in Kentucky or Tennessee, I'm not sure which, when they were in there, they had to send a group out to find food and stuff, and they went across enemy lines. And this was when Kirby Smith, I think, was around there, and that was a Confederate person. So Don Pardee, his group wasn't back across enemy lines, and so he had to take a small group and kind of fake out 15,000 rebels and make it seem like they were a lot bigger. And he was able to do that and get our guys across back enemy lines. And the rest of, I know Charles, that really, every time they had a reunion, he always brought that story up. That was a big deal. And then it was interesting. They went to the Mississippi. The next battle they fought in was the Battle of Vicksburg, which was a huge battle. They had to get Vicksburg in order to be able to win, because that controlled the whole Mississippi and the travel down the Mississippi. And they went down. Let's see. They went down, and they ended up stopping at a river, a tributary called the Yazoo River, and they went up the Yazoo. Anyway, they went up the Yazoo, and they got to. They were sort of north of Vicksburg, because they couldn't go past. They couldn't go past Vicksburg because the batteries were real close and the river was kind of narrow there, and they would have felt like they would have got just creamed, So they had to stop north of it, but to get as close to Vicksburg as they could, there was what was called the Chickasaw Bluffs, and that was basically they had to walk through a swamp, and then they had to go uphill to where there were, 15,000 rebels waiting for them, and they tried. They made a try at it, and it was disastrous. So they came back down, and they ended up coming back out. They ended up trying to go down. I should have a map at this point of Vicksburg and the Mississippi, because it kind of turns around, and they actually try and dig a canal that gets it so they don't have to go right by Vicksburg, but they can get still close enough. And they tried that, but the erosion was terrible, and they had to abandon that. So then they decided, okay, we're just going to have to send our boats right past Vicksburg and hope for the best. So they sent a bunch of their soldiers on the side to go through the land so they weren't all on the boats, and they had a bunch of ironclad boats as well. And so they talk about it in the book about how they sort of waited around the corner to see if these boats are going to make it through. And the first one was on fire, and it was like, oh no, we've really screwed up. But it was only one boat that didn't really kind of make it. All the rest of them made it down, and with that, they were able then to take Vicksburg. They could get rid of those batteries, and it was a much. If you're really interested in this, you should look it up, because it took a lot longer than what I'm saying. But it was quite a thing. In that battle, Charles gets shot in the left foot, and he has to kind of limp down the hill, and he ends up going back to Bainbridge on a furlough. He gets back there, gets kind of mended up. He was on a 3-year term when he signed up, and so he ends up leaving, coming back, going down to Louisiana, where he meets Don Pardee, and to finish out his term, he ends up, they kind of, Don Pardee has some legal background, and he's kind of like a judge down there, and Charles becomes his assistant, and they're kind of like a military governor, and they, let's see if they're like a military governor. Let me move this. And they perform marriages and everything, but Charles ends up figuring out that a lot of these Southern women, when they're going to the stores, that they're really buying stuff, to smuggle to their soldier husbands, family, and so he kind of catches on to this, and there's a lot of black women that are working for the Southern white women, and he has somebody kind of follow them, and when they get back, he kind of makes them come back over to where he's at, and then he has the black women jump out of the wagon, and when they do, the strings that are holding up all their hams fall down, and they're all laying on the ground. And so he kind of figured out get the food that they were smuggling. And so it's, yeah. So he has this way of, anyway, I'll talk more about it. Let's see, so at the end of his 3-year term, he ends up going back to Bainbridge. In 3 weeks, he marries Sophie. They in Shaler'sburg, and then she and him, not at the same time. He goes down first, but they go back to the south, back to Louisiana, because he really had kind of a good gig going down there. They really loved him down there, and he was doing, he was making some good money, and he promised her that if you don't like it up there, or down there, if it's too hot, stuff like that, we'll leave. We'll come back up. But she could sort of tell that, kind of sounds like my wife when we went to Alaska. But but anyway, so they go down there, and he spends a lot of time down there, and he ends up sending money back to his brother-in-law Henry Brewster to save and to start looking for land. And let's see. And then he ends up. So this is the map, kind of. That's the map of all the acreage that he ends up having. So he's right now in this area, right? So this would be Geauga Lake Road right here, and this would be Pettibone Road, and they're living right now in here. He ends up buying through an auction, and he has Henry Brewster do it for him. What's called the McClintock land, and that's let's see, I wrote it down. Let's see, that was 106 acres at an auction. Okay, and he was already, at that point, John had split the 85 acres up, so he had like 42 acres already, and so now he had 106 plus the 42. And he made an arrangement with his mom and dad that they would live there and that he would take care of everything. Let's see. He buys the McClintock farm, but so then eventually they leave Louisiana, and he comes back up to Bainbridge to try and make a go of it, through agriculture, and they end up selling eggs and cheese. Charles realized he had a hard time with heat prostration down in the war, and it was just hard for him to make a go of it, tilling the land. So he ends up working as the postmaster at the pond, and then he eventually, at this point, Garfield is a congressman, and he and Lucretia, they're living in Hiram. And Charles reaches out to James Garfield and says, "Hey, I've heard about these railway positions where you're like a postal clerk. Is there any way I can get one of those kind of jobs?" And so Lucretia and James invite he and Sophie out to Hiram. They go out and they talk about this. And in a long story short, he ends up getting a job, and it works out real good. But then he starts, in just handling the mail and the newspapers and stuff like that, he ends up becoming like a postal agent where he can figure out the people that are stealing from the U.S. Post Office. And Frederick writes that it's kind of like he's catching thieves like finding beehives. And what he does is he takes, like for bees, what you would do is you take a piece of honeycomb, you'd place it in a spot and watch the bees where they go, afterwards. And then you put a piece of honeycomb somewhere else and you watch, and where those two routes cross, that's going to be where to look for the hive. And that's what Charles does with money. He puts money in envelopes and puts it in different places, and where they, then he ends up finding out who's doing it. And he's real good at this. And I mean, he's like teaching other people how to do this. Well, around this time, that's when he loses his son, Don Pardee Henry, to diphtheria. And this is just when he's real young. I don't know, imagine, they didn't say, but like, it must be like 2 or 3 years old. And let's see. Also at this time, or let's see, I'm not just true. So as a special agent, he moves to Cleveland because it's easier to get things there. They have a house now in Cleveland. They end up taking trips to Washington D.C. because now James Garfield is, he's actually gets elected as a senator, and this position that he has, not only is he good at catching thieves, but he's a real political person for Garfield, because these rail positions, you end up traveling all around the state, and Charles always has Garfield's interests at heart, and he's always finding out what the weather's like as far as politics goes in all the different towns, and then he comes back and reports to Garfield, and it really helps out Garfield a lot. So eventually, and let's see. So then he ends up getting I think he ends up buying. Well, I don't know if he happens right this time, but he ends up buying this place called the Russ Place. And that was owned by that Dr. Shippard that was a neighbor. And so that is on the other side of the Chagrin River in what we call as the caves area. They said it wasn't real good tillable land because there was a lot of rocks and caves and stuff. But that becomes their main thing for collecting maple syrup. Yes?
Jim, that's what's now Lorimer's property, but right on the very edge of that is where you guys might have heard the Blind Squirrel Winery.
Oh.
That's right on the very back edge of that, right where you're
right in there.
Where the angle is, that's right there.
Yeah, and this I think probably is Brewster Road, and that of course used to go right through the land there.
Right. Exactly.
So anyway, that was let's see, what did I say? That was like 165 acres. So I think then.
So is that like in 1870 or so?
Well, he ends up buying that Russ farm, I think, in 1882, but I might be a little farther ahead in my story here. So Garfield, like I said, now is a senator, and he likes the idea of having a 6-year term instead of a 2-year for the representative. But really a short time into his term, they go to the Republican convention, and I think that was in Chicago, and he endorses General Sherman to be the president. But while he's at this Republican convention, all the states vote for Garfield. And he was just really surprised by this, and I don't think he was prepared for this, and he ends up getting the nomination. And Fred says in the book that Charles said that he was really never the same guy after that, because it was just so, an amazing thing that he had to all of a sudden do. And he ends up, as we know, winning the election. There is a point in there where he mentions to his campaign people not to badmouth the other guy, which is so anyway. 4 months into his term, of course, he gets shot by Guiteau, Charles Guiteau, and he is assassinated in July 2nd, 1881. He ends up dying in September 19th, 1881. And Guiteau was kind of crazy. He asked to meet Charles in his cell, and Charles goes there. He goes into the cell, and he said, James Garfield was really a good guy. I probably shouldn't have done that. He said, but he was expecting Arthur, President Arthur, who succeeded him, that he was going to, because he sort of helped him out become president, that he was going to give an ambassador position. So he just really wasn't right in the head. But everybody thought that Charles was going to be the executioner, and they were sending him, people were sending him black masks to use for the hanging, and all kinds of rope and everything. And Fred mentions that he ended up with lots of extra rope at the farm because of that. So let's see. So he ends up I think he ends up there for about a year as the U.S. Marshal. He had to be confirmed by the Senate and everything. But when, after Garfield got elected, he really wanted Charles real close to him. And in fact, prior to that, he had gone there and he had, Charles had a chance to meet the two presidents, Grant and Hayes, while Garfield was there. Let's see. And so eventually he comes back to Bainbridge, works for a while, but becomes really kind of bored. And he ends up, he's got his friend Don Pardee down in Louisiana, still working, doing the judge type position down there. And he asks Don Pardee, hey, is there anything down there, that I can do? Because he still has like, now he's got like 400 acres now, and he's got 3 goals that he wants to fix all the buildings up around all these places, and he's got, so there's 3, so he's got 3 kind of farmsteads there. They call this place the Russ Place, Squire's Place, and the home place. And for all these people, he's got tenants that take care of the areas. In fact, we have a descendant of one of the tenants right here. I just met her when she came in. Would you stand up real quick?
There's 2 of us.
2 of us, yeah.
I was a Jorgensen, and it was my grandfather that worked for them, and they lived here in Bainbridge. And then Nels Jorgensen, they came over from Denmark. He and his wife worked for them, and I don't know exactly how long, but for quite a while I was doing the farm work there.
No,
But
thank you.
it's so interesting.
Yeah, and when she introduced herself today, I looked up Jorgensen in the back, and there's like 12 different references to it in here, so it's kind of neat. So anyway, he ends up going back down to Texas. Let's see, let me make sure I didn't forget anything here. And he works the rails down there as a, let's see, no, wait a minute, let's see. Okay. Oh, I gotta go, okay. So, okay, so that's him. So he ends up going down to Texas, and he takes Sophie with him and Jimmy. Jimmy's younger at that point. Fred's in school. Fred's at Hiram, and this is his guys, his postal agent guys that work down in Texas. And he did this for about 4 or 5 years, but his heart was always back in Bainbridge, and he had a hard time. But he would, right now with all that land, they were doing a lot of maple sugaring, and I didn't realize until I read the book how it was every spring they talked about how many barrels of maple syrup they made, and he was real innovative in coming up with a boiling system with steam, and he wrote articles for the Ohio Farmer magazine, but he wanted to. He had these 3 goals of taking care of all of his outbuildings and everything, put the kids through college, and then he kind of wanted to develop some sort of like a little pension for Sophie. And I think he must have had a lot of time on his hands. He wrote letters to Fred, and he told Fred how he could, ideas for how to consume the surplus hours above 24 hours a day. And then he mentions how, Sophie is so well received by the ladies down there, and he mentions to her, well, she's president of the Ladies Something Society. He doesn't know. Let's see. He also sends, at this time, Fred has found his fiancée, Louise, and he sends letters to Fred with his thoughts on picking marriage partners. and his judgments of characteristics of people Henry, men and women, should consider in choosing life partners. And that's in the book if you need to. So now he's about 56 years old. You know, you'd think he comes back from Texas, all his land is paid for and everything. And then he finds out that, he gets a call from two of the sons of James Garfield, who now are lawyers in a Cleveland firm, and they're representing a surety business that had bonded some employees of a company, and this employee took off with $20,000. Back then, that was a big deal. $20,000. He goes to Brazil. He leaves a note that says, "Good luck in finding me. Your pockets aren't deep enough to find me." You know, and so these two Garfield sons, they contact Charles and say, "Hey, listen, you know, you're not working right now. You want to go down to Brazil and catch this guy?" And he says, "Yeah." So they give him a handwriting sample and a picture, and he goes to Washington to get the right papers from the ambassador. Then he goes to New York, and he takes a trip, 26 days, stopping at all these places. Stops in Rio, and then Sao Paulo, and then he has to go to a place in the coffee areas up in the mountains called Jacutinga. But he didn't know that. I mean, all he has is, and I forgot, on the way down there, he meets a guy who's really friendly, and usually these people get off at much nicer places than where Charles is going. And this guy's going even further. And he says, and he asks, you know, he talks to this guy and says, you know, well, where are you going? You know, and he says, well, I'm going deep into Brazil. And he says, and he wants to know, like, well, you know, anyway, they become real good friends. But he's also from Philadelphia, which is where this other embezzler he was chasing was from, Philadelphia. So now he's starting to think, man, what's going on here, you know? And why is he going all the way down there? Is he like this other guy? And so he devises with the group of people that he befriended, he plays these little games like, okay, hey, let's all play a game and see who can guess how tall everybody is. You know, so they play these games and he's get his height. He says, all right, let's play a game, see how much everybody weighs. And he does that. And then when they get off at one of these stops, they're going to go explore together. And he says, hey, before we go, let's all get a photo together. And he does that. And so now he's got the weight, the height, and the photo of this guy that he's not sure about. And anyway, and this other guy is thinking, and by the way, his name is Helm. He says his last name is A.R. Helm. But on his cuffs of his shirt, there's an embroidered C. And that was thought he was kind of strange too. So anyway, they get off. Charles, of course, his main thing is to get this other guy named Botsford, who stole the $20,000. And he starts going into like hotels, those kind of places, looking at the registry, trying to match handwriting and look for. Anyway, he's doing pretty good. He's finding, you know, he's on a trail, and he ends up going all the way up, you know, into these mountains to this place called Jacutinga. Oh, and on the way there, he stops at a store where, lo and behold, his friend that he met in the boat is working at this store. And he says, you know, and he's real happy to see him, the other guy. And he says, you know, well, you know, where are you going? He says, well, I got to go up into the mountains, but I'll stop back and see you. And on the way, I know, when he gets into Sao Paulo, he talks to the ambassador guy, and he gets all the papers to chase this guy named Botsford back into the mountains. And the guy, and the ambassador guy, I think his last name was Conger, he says, by the way, have you heard of, there's another guy we're interested in. His name is Calawander, you know, the sea. And so Charles says, well, is he about this weight? And is he about this height? and is this what he looks like? He says, where did you get this information? And so now he's got, so then he continues looking, he crosses this guy, he finds where he is, and he tells him, hey, listen, I got to go up here, but I'll be back, and I'll check in on you when I get back. And of course, he's getting the papers to be able to arrest him. And so he does that. Oh, no, let's see. Okay, so he gets the papers. He ends up going up into the jungles, into this coffee area, and to the house, and the reputation of this guy that he's after is really bad. He's got 20 officers with him, and they approach the house. This Botsford guy comes out of the house. He's got a gun in his belt and a machete on his leg, and Charles is with this other guy along with these 20 policeman type figures, and he doesn't do anything. All the people, they just sit there, they're like frozen. And Charles looks at his friend and says, why aren't they getting him? And they says they're sort of afraid of him. And with that, Charles gets off his mule, grabs the gun and the machete, and with that, everybody jumps in on him. So now they got him. So and the guy knew that, and he says, are you Captain Henry? And he said, yeah, and anyway, so then they come back through, and they get back to the store where the other guy is, and he serves him his papers, and he grabs him. So now they're all coming back, to the coast. They end up making, he ends up having he gives them a choice. They can behave in their their places, their apartments, or he can put them down below where it's real dank and, and moisture and all that stuff. And so they say they'll behave. And so he has to sit in the hallway with a gun, on either side of the apartments where they are. And they, and they make it all the way back. The boat got stuck in mud a couple times, but they did end up making it back. At that point, when he gets to New York, a bunch of marshals and that kind come onto the boat. They take him. Charles is like a hero. This is just one of the, I think Linda sent these, but this is one of the newspaper articles, and he's like nationwide. He's like he goes down looking for one, and he comes back with two. It's so anyway that. And then later on, they reach out to him to do the same thing, to find a guy in Costa Rica, but he stole $40,000. So he goes down the Mississippi, takes a boat all the way to Costa Rica. He gets on land, and within a half hour, he finds this guy. But this guy is kind of he also has he's not doing well. Charles ends up taking walks with him while he's drunk and everything. They end up, he ends up with incriminating letters from, basically incriminating, 6 letters that are incriminating 2 other people. And Charles has those as well. But this guy ends up getting, they didn't want to extradite him, so he ended up having to, he kind of tricks him into wanting to go back and right himself. But before he can do that, this guy dies of some disease, and by this time, Charles ends up, like carrying his casket and giving his eulogy and everything. It's kind of so. Anyway, he gets and then he ends up coming. I think on his way back, he cut through and went to New York, and Don Pardee, who was still in Louisiana, was real upset that he didn't come and see him on his way. But then he realized that the widow who thought he was coming, she was coming down with her lawyer to meet, her husband, who's now is of course dead. And the lawyer, it turns out, was one of the ones that these letters incriminated. So the lawyer was more interested in coming down and getting these letters. So anyway, he ends up, they end up, that's part of the whole story of him doing this embezzling thing when he's in his late 50s. So let's see. He comes home. He's kind of famous now with all this surety business and all the way he's able to trick people into, and he's the company, the surety company would like him to keep working for them, he ends up having 4 or 5. It's kind of a part-time job. He does that kind of like for the rest of his life. His son, James Garfield, by now has, he graduated from Hiram, was real good in athletics as well as in school. He goes to law school. The idea was that he and Frederick would work together. But he goes back, he's got a fiance, he goes back to Hiram. They have a kind of an alumni meal, and it was either the spring water or ice cream that was shipped in. But anyway, he and one other person end up dying of typhoid fever. And they say that he was, of course, never the same after that. He spent a lot of time at this point in his life overseeing the tenants, writing magazine articles, and really enjoying his grandchildren and sugaring and overseeing the whole maple sugar process. He plays a game that with his own kids and with his grandkids, and they call it Two Friends and a Bear. And the game goes, you sort of act out, there's two friends walking along, and all of a sudden the bear comes, and that's Charles. And one of the kids is supposed to lay down and pretend to be dead. The other one climbs a tree, which could be on the top of a chair. And then the bear comes over and smells the supposed dead person, but sniffs around. And then the child that's on the chair is supposed to come down after the bear leaves. The bear's not going to eat somebody who's dead. The child comes down and says, hey, what did the bear say to you? And this is a game they just play over and over again. And the answer is, you're never supposed to trust a wretch who would leave his friend in a time of need. And they just played this game over and over again, just to, I guess, have this lesson. Anyway, and then there was another story. He was still very involved with Hiram College, and he had an alumnus from South Dakota who asked Charles that he had a lot of fossils out in South Dakota, and that would he like, would Hiram College like to have fossils? And Charles's answer was, oh, we love fossils here at Hiram. In fact, we employ some on our faculty. So anyway, let's see. On March 29th, 1896, Charles Adams Henry is born, and that's his namesake. He does also have a chance to return to Vicksburg as a part of the military commission to help highlight where his regiment was. And I'm thinking if anybody ever went to Vicksburg, you could find those markers, with his name there. He gave the area of land off of Brewster Road. He's now calling it Willow Farm. His farm he calls Maple Farm. He gives that Willow Farm to Fred and his family, his growing family now. And he ends up buying stationery that says Willow Farm on it, and he has Maple Farm stationery as well. Let's see. They start on September 15th, 1900. They had the first annual Henry Family Society meeting, and then they had it a bunch of years after that, where the first time it was at Edward Henry's house off of 306, but then they mostly had it at the big house. And then this is the last picture taken of Sophie. And then these are pictures that I took in the Chagrin Cemetery. So it's these two. These are the actual grave markers, but this is like one of those things. It says Captain Charles Eugene Henry, 42nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry, born in Bainbridge, November 29th, 1835, died in Cleveland, November 3rd, 1906. A lover of the country and his home, faithful in public service, friendship tried and true, and the trusted confidant of a martyred president. Sophia M., widow of Charles E. Henry, daughter of Frederick and Marcia Underwood Williams, born in Shalersville, November 9th, 1840, died in Bainbridge, June 14th, 1927. And then Frederick and Louise, their marker. This was the big house, not so big right now, but This eastern section, let's see, was added spring of 1875. This was added on. And then Charles, with all the stuff he did with his outbuildings and his sugar house and everything else, he always regretted that he never did something better for Sophie. And so about 25 years later, Fred builds the additional quarters on the big house. And I don't know, this looks, Amanda, Mike, kind of looks similar, huh?
What year was that, Jim?
What year was that? Let's see, 1921. And Sophie is able to, they kind of had a special quarters for her there, and she's able to spend the last 6 years of her life in that. And then I just found these pictures. This train station was such a big part. This was the first rendition and before it got burned, and then it got burned down, and then it was rebuilt. But Charles, when he would come back from Cleveland, the kids would hear the whistle, and then they would come running down out of the big house to meet him coming back up the road.
Where was the train station?
I'm sorry?
Where was the train station?
Oh, it's right on Depot Road, right? It's so as soon as right. So as soon as you cross the railroad track, you take a left, and there's still some of the foundation stuff left over there. But I think that's
Jim,
yeah.
If you could go back one picture
Yeah.
to the main house, which hill was it that James, the president, rolled down with Charles drinking wine when they were like 60 years old, acting like kids?
Well, there might have been wine in the picture. It didn't mention that in the book, but it kind of makes it fun, doesn't it? But yeah, they did talk about that they had a lot of fun times on the yard of the big house, and that sometimes they were like, yeah, and Frederick remembers playing with Harry Garfield a lot, and so yeah, they had but yeah.
Yeah, she said, to see grown men act thus like joyful children when there were no children playing at all with them seemed very queer to me.
Yeah.
She would have to talk about that. That was an interesting episode.
Yeah, and that's it. So, yeah, questions? Hope I wasn't too long.
Does anyone have any questions for him? It's very interesting.
You know, Don, where's Don? Don, do you have any comments about all this? I mean, not to put you on the spot, but do you remember any of these, you know?
Yeah, he lived there.
Because you lived there, yeah.
He was the last living one.
You know,
He lived in the little house.
ago,
Well, your dad.
Yeah.
He didn't drive a
Boys
car,
lived in
so
little house.
he had an office downtown, the lawyer,
Right.
so he would take the train in every day. Take the train back.
Right. And I guess in the winters, I don't know, in the winters they had, Fred and Sophie would go down and stay with, or not Fred, Charles and Sophie would go down to Cleveland and stay with them during the real cold winters. But then at the very end, they were staying at their own house. Anything else?
I think, when did you say they expanded the house, or came out?
1921.
1921? I was gonna say 1970, or somewhere in that
Okay.
range, yeah.
Where does Chuck come into this?
Pardon?
Where does Chuck come into this picture?
I mean, his line like? So,
Yeah,
Charles was Frederick's first, the boy. I mean,
Your grandfather?
right, yeah. So my great-grandfather was Frederick, and great-great-grandfather was Charles. And that's all I'm gonna go. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting when you said they built the room
were Captain Henry's wife.
Yeah.
And Don would talk about all the ants and people that came there and died.
Oh,
Blanche was always taking care, I don't know always,
yeah.
but several relatives came there, and that seemed to be the room
Yeah.
that they were
But I
living.
was saying, as far as having that Sophie had kind of a place there, and that other people came back there.
Relatives.
Yeah.
When the Blanches came back.
Frederick Henry wrote the book. He had his library up on the right side, up above that.
Up here.
There he had a big.
The library up there?
Big library, no computers, no phones, just a fountain pen and he'd be there every day and write away.
Yeah.
Keep, get lots of files and lots of records.
We thought that was haunted when we were kids.
Yeah. Don, in the back of the house, I was just talking to Mike recently, and there's two big, like, tanks, Mike, right? Under the ground, and he were wondering what that might have been.
Who gave him the question? Thanks.
I'm sorry.
Ask this
Yeah.
Underground tanks,
Horizontal tank, yeah.
big tanks underground under the house.
Oh, in the back, there was
Yeah.
a cistern,
Cistern?
a cistern,
Okay.
and a grid
Oh.
cistern. I don't know. They use that as water. I don't know how the water storage up.
Okay.
I don't know if it's cistern.
We have, Grace has put together a bunch of books here, and what's real interesting is the maps, the tax maps that started like 1820, and they keep going up, and it just shows changes in ownership. And I know at one point, Charles deeded over his land to, maybe it was his brother-in-law or somebody, because he was worried about something, and then he deeded it back to him afterwards. But it's just interesting.
Did we ever own the Jaga Lake?
No.
I always heard it was lost in a poker game.
Oh, yeah. No. Not that I'm aware of, at least, and again, my whole source for everything I'm talking about is what I read in here, so that's, and also what Larry Henry had. So, yeah. Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, did they ever take any borders from Java Lake, work with Java Lake way back then?
Borders?
Yeah, they don't, yeah.
I don't know. In some ways, I've just given kind of a up until Charles passed away, or 1906 or so. But what's happened after that, I don't know. So I know at one point the house was kind of like an apartment type thing.
That's what I was thinking, man.
Yeah.
There's a Java Lake.
Yeah, and I don't know.
It was a 6-unit apartment.
Pardon?
It was a 6-unit apartment.
6-unit. Okay, 6-unit apartment.
Yeah, my father did tell me that. My dad has land, on the other side of Java Lake.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Was that a brick house that was white painted white? Because it was brick, red brick, and then it was white.
Oh. And you're talking about the big house, right?
The big house.
It got resided with redwood. It's resided with
Aren't they both
redwood.
the same?
Oh, these are the same house, yeah.
The siding's different.
But it's the other side, it's the
siding
old
is redwood.
original house.
Redwood.
James,
This was the original
Yeah,
siding?
it got taken off.
And it got taken off and put this on?
With redwood.
So it's brick. I have some other things I want to say.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Okay, your dad was Gene, your
Right.
grandfather was Charles.
Charles, right.
My daughter, Linda Ryan, was in college down there from, okay. My daughter, Linda Ryan, was college from 72 to 76. She worked in the office with your grandpa.
I remember Linda Ryan. I went to school then at Hiram too.
Okay. My daughter almost roomed with your older sister, but then it didn't happen.
Okay.
I'm not sure, yeah, the oldest one.
Okay.
What's her name? I can't think of
Dorothy,
it
Dorothy?
right now. But then, yeah, working in the office.
Okay.
And she said, Mr. Henry, would you please put your cigar out?
Yeah.
And another thing is Fred and Janet's oldest daughter here tonight.
She was gonna come, but
She couldn't come.
yeah.
Well, she was on the Paige Palmer show. What? That was you? Okay. You were carrying the candle.
I was.
And you got on fire. And I was sitting at my home watching it. Because I used to do Paige Palmer. Bump, bump, bump.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. What is your name?
Casey.
Casey.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was a tailor, Taylor May Road. My family, Enos D. Kingsley came here.
Yeah, he was on the list,
Up
yeah.
there, yeah. I guess Rich Childs isn't here tonight, is he? He's our historian. He's got an encyclopedia like an encyclopedia. I just remember about this much of it. So good to see you. Pardon?
Never heard anybody say that.
You'll go down in history. Yeah. And I know you're okay. And Janet wrote those stories. She said, why should you be lonely at college? Because all the houses down at college.
There's nothing left at home.
Yeah, nothing left. I used to read everything that she wrote. Your mom was terrific.
All right.
I also wanted to mention that there's a beautiful dollhouse replica of the big house, and it is now housed at the Bainbridge Township Historical Society Museum, which is on Route 306, just south of the fire station. And it's a beautiful replica, and if you're interested in seeing it, we're open by appointment or every third Saturday from 1 to 4. So the next Saturday that will be open will be May 21st from 1 to 4. If you're interested in coming and tour the house and see the dollhouse on display. It really is beautiful, and Ellen probably can speak to this better because it was made. Ellen, do you want to tell the history of the dollhouse?
It was made by Andy Messner and given to my mom, who was a big fan of dollhouses, and it was just a beautiful thing. And you could take it completely apart, the roofs and everything. Andy spent so much time making this, and my mom had a wonderful time decorating it, putting wonderful pieces in it, pictures of the family that were made into miniatures, and she loved it. And it was too big to come to any of our houses, so we, the family donated to the Historical Society.
With the detail too, right down to the portrait.
Yes. Yes. It's wonderful, yeah. But Andy Messner was the one that made it, a cousin.
But the detail is really astounding. So I hope some of you get a chance to come and see it. Is that it, Jim? Any other questions for Jim? No? All right, well, I want to remind the docents that